We take the raw lead of everyday life and turn it into the cinematic gold of storytelling excellence. Experience the magic of narrative alchemy as we transform pain into power and loss into legacy. Subscribe today and witness the transformation in every new video.
I didn't say a word. I didn't knock. I didn't beg. I just stood there on my own front porch, in the dark, holding a key that no longer fit my own door, and I made a decision. By the time the sun came up the next morning, every single thing that belonged to my daughter's boyfriend was sitting on the front lawn. And I was inside, drinking my coffee. Let me tell you how we got there. My name is Carol. I'm 64 years old. I live in a 3-bedroom house in Dayton, Ohio that my late husband, Gerald, and I bought 31 years ago. We painted every room ourselves. We planted the hydrangeas. Along the front walk, we raised our daughter, Melissa, in that house. Gerald passed 6 years ago, heart attack. Quick, no warning, and since then, it had just been me. Me and the hydrangeas and the memories painted into every wall. I won't pretend I wasn't lonely. I was, especially in the winters. Especially around the holidays when the house got too quiet and too big, and I'd find myself eating soup at the kitchen table just staring at Gerald's empty chair. But I had built a life. I had my routine. I had my neighbor Patty 2 doors down who came over for coffee on Tuesday mornings. I had my church group on Thursdays. I had my garden and my books. And a satellite TV package I probably paid too much for. I was okay. Not thriving, maybe, but okay. Melissa lived about 40 minutes away, in an apartment she shared with her boyfriend, Daniel. They had been together about 3 years by the time any of this happened. I want to be fair when I describe Daniel, because I don't think he was a bad person when Melissa first brought him home to meet me. He was polite enough, remembered to take his shoes off at the door, called me Miss Carol, brought a bottle of wine the first time he came to Sunday dinner. He worked in sales, or so I understood, and he talked a lot, mostly about himself, mostly about deals he was closing or money he was about to make. I smiled and nodded and passed the green beans. Melissa adored him. That was plain to see. She laughed differently around him, bigger, louder, like she was performing. I noticed that, but kept it to myself. She was 34. She didn't need her mother's opinions on her love life. The first time anything felt off was Thanksgiving. They came together, Daniel and Melissa, and somewhere between the sweet potato casserole and the pecan pie, Daniel started asking me questions. Not rude questions, conversational questions, the kind that don't seem like anything until you think about them later. He asked how long I'd lived in the house. He asked if the neighborhood had changed much. He asked what a house like this might go for these days, if I ever thought about selling, if I'd considered downsizing now that it was just me. I said something about not being in any rush. He nodded, smiled, said, "Smart. Lock in the equity." I didn't think much of it then. He was in sales. Numbers were how he talked, but I thought about it later, washing the dishes alone after they left. Lock in the equity. I stood there with my hands in the warm, soapy water, and I thought that was a strange thing to say to a woman in her own home on Thanksgiving. Things moved fast after that, the way these things always seem to when you look back. In January, Melissa called me to say that her and Daniel's lease was up in March, and they were thinking about their options. The apartment was getting expensive. Daniel had left his sales job, something about the management, something about the culture I didn't fully follow, and was starting his own thing, which apparently took time to get off the ground. She said they were trying to save money. She said she missed having a real home with a yard. I heard what she wasn't quite saying. I told her to give me a few days to think about it. I won't lie. Part of me was happy. Part of me wanted Melissa home. I thought about Sunday mornings with her downstairs making coffee. I thought about not eating soup alone at that kitchen table. I thought about the house having noise in it again, life in it again. I am human. I was lonely. And she was my daughter. I called her back and I said yes. I told her they could stay in the 2 spare bedrooms, that we'd work out a small amount for groceries and utilities, and that I expected everyone to be respectful of the fact that it was my home. Melissa said, "Of course." "Mom, absolutely. We're so grateful." Daniel got on the phone and said, "Miss Carol, we won't be any trouble at all." They moved in on a Saturday in late March. For the first few weeks, it was fine. Better than fine, some days. Melissa cooked twice a week, and she was a good cook, better than me, honestly. And I told her so. Daniel stayed out of the way mostly. Set up a little workspace in one of the spare bedrooms with his laptop and his notebook. He said his new business was in consulting, though I never fully understood what he was consulting on or for whom. But he was quiet, and he kept his dishes clean, and he didn't leave his shoes in the hallway, so I had nothing to complain about. The first thing I noticed and told myself not to overreact to was the furniture. It started small. A throw pillow that appeared on my couch one day, burgundy, which didn't match anything in the room. I asked Melissa about it, and she said Daniel's sister had given it to them as a housewarming gift, and she thought it looked nice. I didn't say anything. It was a pillow. Then my kitchen table centerpiece, a little ceramic bowl. Gerald and I had bought at a craft fair in Vermont 20 years ago. Nothing expensive but meaningful, disappeared, and was replaced with a wire fruit basket. I found my ceramic bowl in the cabinet under the sink. I took it out and put it back on the table without saying a word. The next week, it was in the cabinet again. Then one afternoon I came home from Patty's to find Daniel standing in the living room with his phone out taking photographs. Not of anything specific sweeping around the room. Pointing at the ceiling, the floors, the windows, like he was documenting the space. I asked him what he was doing. He said he was just showing his sister the house. She'd asked what it looked like. He put his phone in his pocket and smiled and went back upstairs. I stood in my living room for a long moment after he left. That night I lay in bed and I thought about the pillow and the fruit basket and the ceramic bowl and the photographs. I thought about Locke and the equity, and I thought about his new consulting business that I'd never once seen produce any actual income. And I thought about Melissa's lease being up and them having nowhere else to go. And I thought about how nobody had taken photographs to show their sister a house since the invention of real estate websites. I decided I was being paranoid. I decided to trust my daughter. That was my first mistake. By June, Daniel was home all day, every day. The consulting business, as far as I could tell, consisted entirely of phone calls that he took in the backyard, pacing back and forth, speaking in a low voice. Melissa was working. She had a job she kept, a good one, managing accounts for a logistics company, but Daniel had no income that I ever saw evidence of. He ate my groceries. He used my washer and dryer constantly, to the point where I had to schedule around him to do my own laundry. He invited 2 of his friends over on a Tuesday night without asking me, and I came downstairs at 9:30 in my robe to find 3 men I'd never met, watching a football game on my television with a 12-pack of beer on my coffee table. I pulled Melissa aside the next day and told her that guests needed to be cleared with me in advance. She apologized. She said Daniel hadn't thought it was a big deal. I said it was my house. So what I thought was a big deal was what mattered. She looked at me in a way I couldn't quite read. Not angry. Something more careful than that. A week later, I got a phone call from my bank. A courtesy call had I requested a copy of my mortgage documents. Someone had called in asking about the loan balance and the payoff amount. I said no. I had not requested that. The representative flagged the account, apologized for the confusion, said it was probably just a clerical mix-up. I hung up the phone and sat down at my kitchen table. Mortgage documents, loan balance, payoff amount. I called my friend Rhonda, who had been a paralegal for 20 years. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. She told me, very calmly, to write down everything I'd noticed. Every incident, every date, every conversation. She told me to make sure my will was current and to call my attorney if I had one, and to under no circumstances sign anything. She also told me something I hadn't thought about. She told me to check every room in the house for things that didn't belong to me. I waited until both of them were out of the house. I went upstairs to the room Daniel used as his office, and I looked around carefully, touching nothing. On his desk, there was a folder. I didn't open it, but the tab on the folder was labeled with my address. My address. On a folder on a desk in my house. I went back downstairs. I sat in Gerald's armchair. I looked around at the room we had built together, the walls we had painted, the floors we had refinished on our hands and knees one long summer weekend. I thought about my ceramic bowl sitting under the sink. I thought about a man I had known for 3 years taking photographs of my ceilings and calling my bank about my mortgage. I picked up the phone and called Melissa. I told her that things weren't working out. I told her I needed them to start making other arrangements, that I was giving them 60 days and I expected that to be respected. I kept my voice calm and even. I was not cruel. I did not accuse anyone of anything specific. I just told her the arrangement needed to end. There was a long pause. Then Melissa said, "Mom, I think you're overreacting. We're family," I said. "I know we're family." 60 days. She said she'd talk to Daniel. She sounded less like my daughter and more like someone reading from a script. After that, the temperature in the house changed. Daniel stopped saying good morning. He stopped clearing his dishes. He started having his phone calls inside the house, in the living room, while I was present, not even lowering his voice. I heard fragments. Something about an appraisal. Something about timelines. Something about how these things took time. I made my coffee and I went to my room and I wrote everything down. Melissa stopped joining me for Sunday morning coffee. She was polite when I saw her in the kitchen, but the warmth was gone, replaced with something brittle and rehearsed. I missed my daughter. I want to be honest about that. I missed her the whole time. I was losing her to something, and I didn't fully understand what. And that hurt more than any of the rest of it. 3 weeks into my 60-day notice, I came back from a doctor's appointment, and my key didn't work. I stood on my own front porch, the porch with Gerald's name still scratched into the concrete from when he'd helped Melissa do that as a little girl. And the wet cement had been irresistible. And I put my key in the lock and turned it, and nothing happened. I tried again. I checked to make sure I had the right key. I did. I stood there and I understood, very calmly, exactly what had happened. I tried the back door. Same thing. I called Melissa's phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted, "My key isn't working. Please call me." 3 minutes passed. Then she texted back. "Daniel had the locks changed for security. We can talk about it when you get home." I read that text 3 times. When I get home, in my home, where I no longer had a key, I want to tell you that I went to a neighbor's house and called a locksmith and had a perfectly rational and practical response to the situation. I want to tell you that, but what I actually did was sit in my car in my own driveway for a long time and cry. Not dramatic crying, the quiet kind. The kind you do when you understand that something is over, that a line has been crossed that cannot be uncrossed, and that the person on the other side of that line is your own child. I thought about calling the police. I want to address that directly, because I imagine it's the first thing anyone would say. Why didn't you just call the police? And the honest answer is, because I needed to think. Because calling the police on my daughter felt like a door closing that I might never be able to reopen. Because I am 64 years old and I have lived long enough to know that some situations do not get better by being escalated in the dark, alone, emotionally. I wanted to be deliberate. I wanted to be certain. I called Rhonda. She stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours. She walked me through everything, calmly and practically. She reminded me that I was the sole owner of that property. My name and my name only on the deed since Gerald had passed. She told me to document the lockout, photograph the door, photograph my key, save every text message. She told me that what Daniel had done was not legal. She told me what my options were, all of them, and we talked through each one. By the end of the call, I knew what I was going to do. I drove to a hardware store that was still open. I bought 2 new lock sets and a deadbolt. I bought work gloves. I drove back and parked down the street. I waited. At 10:40 that night, I saw the lights in the upstairs bedroom go out. I waited another 40 minutes. Then I got out of my car and I went around to the back of the house, to the basement window that had never latched properly. The one Gerald had always meant to fix and never got around to. I opened it, climbed through, and went upstairs into my own home. I did not go to bed. I went to Daniel's office room first. I took the folder with my address on it, and I photographed every page inside without opening it any further than I had to. Then I put it back exactly where it was. Then I went to the garage, where I kept Gerald's old hand truck, the one he'd used for moving furniture. And I started working. I worked quietly and steadily for most of the night. I went through the spare bedrooms. and I collected every item that belonged to Daniel. His clothes, his folders, his laptop bag, his cologne and his shaving kit from the bathroom, his case of protein powder from the kitchen, his football-watching shoes from beside the door. I worked room by room, methodically, the way you do when you are not angry, when you are past anger, when you are simply in the business of reclaiming what is yours. I stacked it all neatly on the front lawn. I want to be clear. I was not destructive. I did not throw anything. I did not break anything. I folded his shirts. I set his laptop bag upright. I was not trying to humiliate him, though I understand that is how it likely felt. I was trying to communicate something that words had failed to communicate. I was trying to say, in the plainest language available to me, this is not yours. And it never was. And you are done. At 4:30 in the morning, I called a locksmith I had spoken to on the phone from my car. Rhonda had found the number for me, who had agreed to come early for an extra fee. By 5:15, I had new locks on every door, and the keys were in my hand. I made coffee. I sat in Gerald's armchair. I watched the sky go from black to gray to the particular pale gold it turns in Ohio in the summer. The hydrangeas were coming in. They looked good this year. At 7 in the morning, I heard footsteps upstairs. I heard a door, then another door, then quiet. Then the front door opened. Then the front door closed. I did not go to the window. I didn't need to. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Melissa. I let it ring. Then it rang again, and I answered. She was crying. She said she didn't know it was going to go this far. She said Daniel had told her it was just a precaution, the locks, that I was being erratic, that I needed to be protected from making decisions that weren't in my best interest. I want you to hear those words the same way I heard them. Protected from making decisions that weren't in my best interest. In my own home. By a man whose name was not on a single piece of paper in that house. I listened. I let her talk. When she was done, I said, Melissa, I love you. And I will always love you. But I need you to understand something. I have been in this house for 31 years. Your father and I built this life here, and I will not be managed out of it by anyone, not by a stranger, and not by you. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Where is Daniel supposed to go? I said I didn't know, and it wasn't my concern. I said she was my daughter, and she was always welcome to come back and talk to me, but that Daniel would not be coming back into my home. I told her about the folder with my address on it. I told her about the phone call to my bank. I told her that whatever he had told her, she needed to ask herself who benefited from me being locked out of my own house. I heard her breathing on the other end of the line. I said, I'm not angry at you, but I need you to understand what was happening. She didn't answer right away. When she did, she just said, I need some time, Mom. I said, Take all the time you need. We hung up. I sat with that for a while. The house was quiet again, but it was a different quiet. My quiet, the quiet I chose, the quiet that belonged to me. I looked around at the rooms and the floors and the walls, and I thought about all the years I had spent building something here, and how close I had come to losing it not to some stranger, but to someone I had invited in, someone I had trusted, someone I had tried to love because my daughter loved him. Here is what I know now, that I did not know at the beginning of this story. Love without boundaries is an open door. That is not a bad thing. In the right circumstances, but you have to know who you're opening it for. And you have to know that you can close it. Melissa called again 6 weeks later. Not about Daniel, they were done, she told me, though she didn't give me details and I didn't ask for them. She called to say she was sorry. A real apology. The kind that doesn't make excuses or explain itself to death, just says the plain thing. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have seen what was happening. I should have said something sooner. I told her what I am going to tell you now. I told her that the most expensive thing in the world is the lesson you learn too late. I almost learned mine too late. I almost let someone walk through my life and take apart everything Gerald and I had built together, quietly, piece by piece, a throw pillow at a time. I almost let it happen because I was lonely and because I loved my daughter and because I kept telling myself I was overreacting. You are not overreacting. If someone is asking questions they have no business asking, you are not overreacting. If things are moving from where you put them, you are not overreacting. If someone is managing your space and your home and your decisions and calling it concern, you are not overreacting. Your instincts are not paranoia. They are information. Use them. I am sitting in my living room right now with my coffee and my hydrangeas blooming through the window and my ceramic bowl back where it belongs on the kitchen table. Gerald's name is still scratched in the porch concrete. The house is quiet the way I want it to be quiet. This is mine. I earned it, and I kept it. And that, I think, is exactly enough.